Names and some details have been changed to protect privacy. This story is based on real events. A cash reward was announced for information leading to the whereabouts of missing teenager Hannah Lawson. Friends and relatives raised $250,000 for anyone who could provide reliable information to help find her. On December 29th, Hannah and her boyfriend Ethan Clarke left the town of Winterfield by car, heading toward a nearby village. They never returned. The next day, authorities discovered their abandoned vehicle. Nearby, the body of Ethan was found. He had been murdered. Hannah's fate remains unknown to this day. Police officers and volunteer search teams immediately launched a full-scale operation. Anyone who might have information relevant to the case was urged to contact local authorities. At the end of 2012, Winterfield and the surrounding areas were preparing for the New Year holidays, living through their usual winter routines. But for two local families, the pre-holiday bustle turned into anxious waiting, feelings that would soon become a tragedy that shook the entire region. For both families, this was the first and most alarming sign. Hannah and Ethan were known for their discipline and responsibility. They always informed their parents of their whereabouts, any delays, or changes in plans. The silence of their phones during the night, especially in the harsh winter conditions of Northern Ridge, and the fact that they were traveling on remote roads, immediately caused panic. Attempts to reach them failed. Automated messages from the network indicated that both phones were out of coverage. At first, relatives tried to find a rational explanation, hoping the batteries had died or that there were connectivity issues in the isolated areas. But with each passing hour, the anxiety grew. Parents began calling friends, acquaintances, and even local hospitals, but no one had any information about the couple's whereabouts. The white hatchback seemed to have vanished into the frozen darkness. Realizing that something serious had occurred, the families did not wait for a miracle. They immediately contacted law enforcement. A missing persons report for the two young people and their vehicle was officially filed. Police launched an investigation, unaware that the clock was no longer ticking by hours, but by minutes, and that what had seemed like a routine evening drive had become a one-way trip for Hannah and Ethan. The morning of December 30th in Winterfield began like any other in the lead-up to the new year. Yet the usual festive anticipation was instantly shattered by a troubling report received by the local station. About 17 kilometers from the village of Maple Hollow, down a remote logging road, authorities found a car matching the description in the missing persons alert. It was the same white hatchback that Hannah and Ethan had taken the night before. The car was abandoned in the middle of the winter forest, and the scene alone told a story of tragedy. Pine branches were scattered under and around the vehicle. It was clear that someone had either tried to mass tire tracks leading into the trees or attempted to free the car if it had gotten stuck. These efforts had failed, and the vehicle remained where it was. A quick inspection of the car's interior immediately confirmed the worst fears of the officers. Inside the vehicle, investigators found large traces of a brown substance, indicating a serious injury. Yet the most horrifying discovery was located just a few meters from the road. Following a trail into the forest, the search team came upon a pile of logs about 14 meters from the car. After clearing this makeshift hiding spot, law enforcement discovered the body of a man with no signs of life. The victim was identified as Ethan Clarke. On-site forensic examination recorded the nature of his injuries. The body showed signs of physical assault consistent with severe beating, but the cause of death was gunshot wounds to the back and head. The nature of the injuries left the young man with no chance of survival. The biggest mystery for the arriving investigators was the absence of Hannah Harper. She was nowhere to be found, not in the car, nor near Ethan's body. The perimeter around the abandoned vehicle was thoroughly searched, but no trace of the 16-year-old girl was discovered. She seemed to have vanished into the snow-covered forest. Due to the high-profile nature and complexity of the case, experienced detectives from the regional center in Irkutsk were called to assist the local police. Their first priority was to reconstruct the timeline of Ethan's final hours. Investigators immediately identified and located the 3 passengers Ethan had driven that evening. One man had exited earlier in the village of Kazemsky, while the other 2 had continued to the final stop in Maple Hollow. All 3 were interviewed, but no direct evidence linked them to the crime at that time, and authorities refrained from making any hasty accusations. Analysis of the evidence in the hatchback allowed the investigators to develop their first working theory. The large amount of biological material found in the trunk suggested that the attack and fatal injuries to Ethan had occurred elsewhere. It was highly likely that the victim's body had been transported in the car after the crime. Investigators suspected that there were multiple perpetrators involved. According to investigators, the criminal group had likely attempted to hijack the vehicle or use it for transportation, but the car either broke down or became stuck on a dead-end road. Unable to continue, the perpetrators decided to get rid of the main evidence, the driver's body, hiding it under the logs and abandoning the vehicle after trying to cover their tracks with branches. This theory explained many inconsistencies, but it did not answer the most pressing question. Where was Hannah Harper, and why had the criminals spared her life, even though she had witnessed the brutal murder of her boyfriend? Hannah's disappearance immediately sparked a wave of rumors and speculation throughout the town. The most popular theory among locals was abduction. Residents speculated that her striking appearance might have drawn unwanted attention or provoked jealousy among criminal elements. Investigators, keeping all possibilities open, launched a comprehensive search of the nearby village of Maple Hollow. The operation was painstaking. Police officers visited every yard, questioning all 300 residents of the village. This meticulous work yielded just one key detail, which would later prove important. A local young man recalled seeing a white hatchback that evening. The car, leaving the village, had stopped at an intersection for several minutes with its hazard lights on before continuing on its route. At the time, the witness had paid little attention, unaware that this could have been the moment when an unknown person entered the vehicle, ultimately ending the lives of the passengers. Simultaneously, a large-scale search operation was launched in the surrounding forest. About 30 volunteers, mostly friends and family of the couple, assisted the police. However, the effectiveness of the search was severely limited by extreme weather conditions and a lack of specialized equipment. During those days, the region experienced record-breaking frost, with temperatures plummeting to minus 47 degrees Celsius. Deep snowdrifts made travel on foot nearly impossible, and there were far too few snowmobiles available. Additionally, the involvement of untrained volunteers carried the risk of destroying potential evidence, which may have been buried beneath the snow. Ultimately, the extensive search of the forest yielded no results, and the theory that Hannah Harper was hiding somewhere in the wilderness had to be temporarily set aside. The investigation then focused on finding the owner of the weapon. Since Ethan Clarke had been shot, all local hunters, foresters, and guards working in the logging areas came under scrutiny. Most of the seasonal workers had already left for the holidays, which narrowed the circle of suspects to the local residents. All of them, including those who legally owned firearms, were subjected to polygraph tests. At that stage, none of the individuals raised any suspicion, leaving investigators at another dead end. The public outcry created a wave of false leads. Authorities received reports claiming that Hannah had contacted someone stating that she was being forcibly held in an apartment in Winterfield on Baikal Street. Police checked every possible address, known hideouts, and hangouts for criminal elements, but no trace of the girl was found. The investigation even attracted the attention of people claiming to be psychics. One clairvoyant insisted she could see the missing girl in a house near a lake. The description resembled the areas around Maple Hollow, prompting investigators to double-check the location, but this lead also proved fruitless. Confusing and contradictory witness statements further complicated the case. Friends of Ethan claimed they had seen his car in Winterfield on the evening of December 29th, supposedly after the time of his disappearance. To verify whether the couple could have returned to town, investigators obtained footage from surveillance cameras at local gas stations. They also conducted a fuel analysis, draining the remaining gasoline from the abandoned car's tank to determine whether it would have been enough to travel from Maple Hollow to Winterfield and back. Analysis showed that the witnesses had likely been mistaken, confusing another similar car for Ethan Clarke's vehicle. Investigators also explored the possibility of a gang operating in the region that targeted long-haul drivers, as the crime had similarities to previous attacks. However, later, the detained gang members categorically denied any involvement, and with no further leads, authorities exhausted all available resources at that time. In June 2013, the active investigation was officially suspended. From the time Hannah had disappeared, winter and spring passed, followed by summer. Search operations along hot leads gradually wound down, but the case remained officially open. The mystery of the teenager's fate was only revealed 8 months later, in August 2013. Thanks to the season for foraging wild mushrooms, locals venturing deep into the forested areas near Maple Hollow stumbled upon human remains. The discovery was made in a remote, hard-to-access part of the forest, away from main trails, but still relatively close to a logging road, suggesting the location was accessible from the roadway. The investigative team that arrived on the scene documented the presence of a skull and skeletal fragments. Long exposure to the elements and wildlife had significantly altered the remains. However, remaining pieces of clothing allowed investigators to perform a preliminary identification at the site. The recovered items clearly matched the description of what Hannah had been wearing on the day she disappeared. A forensic examination later confirmed the cause of death. Specialists identified characteristic injuries on the bones consistent with gunshot wounds. The ballistic pattern of the trauma matched the wounds previously found on Ethan Clarke. This discovery became a key breakthrough, officially linking the two incidents into a single case. It confirmed the theory that the same perpetrator had used the same weapon in both murders. The location of Hannah Harper's remains reshaped investigators' understanding of the events. Her body was found at a significant distance from the site where, during the winter, the abandoned car and Ethan Clarke's body had been discovered. This suggested that the victims had been separated during the attack, or that a chase through the forest had taken place. The fact that Hannah was found alone debunked earlier assumptions that the attack had occurred simultaneously inside the vehicle. After completing the necessary procedural actions and laboratory tests, the remains were returned to the family for burial. The relatives were finally able to lay their daughter to rest, but the identity of the perpetrator remained unknown. All collected evidence, including details of the injuries, was added to the case file. Yet investigators still had no specific suspect who could be directly linked to the crime. With all available leads exhausted, the active phase of the investigation was temporarily suspended until new developments emerged in the summer of 2014, a year and a half after the tragic events. Meanwhile, Technical teams continuing to track the international identifiers of the stolen mobile devices recorded the long-awaited activity. The phone belonging to Ethan Clarke, which had gone missing at the crime scene, was detected on the network of a local mobile operator. The signal originated within the Winterfield area, indicating that the device had not been taken out of the region or destroyed. Instead, it had remained in circulation among the local population. Detectives from the Criminal Investigation Unit immediately acted on the new information. Within a short time, they identified the current owner of the phone. It belonged to a resident of Maple Hollow, who explained that he had bought the device from a friend for a symbolic amount, unaware of its criminal origins. Tracing the brief chain of ownership led investigators to the original source, the home of a local hunter and his son, Paul Samarin. Paul had already been on the police radar during the early stages of the search, but at that time, there was no material evidence linking him to the case. This time, however, authorities had strong grounds to conduct forced investigative measures. A team of detectives and forensic experts arrived at Samarin's residence to carry out a thorough search. Paul's behavior was markedly different from his earlier, restrained demeanor. He appeared nervous, and when offered to undergo a polygraph test again, he categorically refused, citing distrust in technical methods. His reaction only reinforced investigators' confidence in their chosen course of action. The decisive breakthrough came during the inspection of outbuildings on the property. In the attic of an old bathhouse, hidden among rags and tools, they discovered a concealed stash. Inside was a sawed-off hunting rifle. The weapon showed clear signs of tampering, and its factory serial numbers had been mechanically removed, making it difficult to immediately trace its origin. Nevertheless, the very fact that Paul was illegally storing a firearm in the home of someone who had sold the victim's phone became critical evidence. The recovered weapon was immediately sent for ballistics testing to compare it with the case data, and Paul Samarin was taken into custody. The combination of facts, the sale of the victim's stolen phone and possession of a matching firearm, completely dismantled the defense Paul had maintained for so long. After being confronted with the irrefutable evidence, Paul's testimony allowed investigators to reconstruct, minute by minute, the events of that fateful night. The suspect's initial theory that jealousy or the existence of secret correspondence had motivated the crime was completely disproven. There was no connection between him and the couple, and acquaintances described Ethan and Hannah's relationship as exclusively trusting. The reality, investigators realized, was terrifying in its senselessness. The tragedy resulted from a series of random events and unprovoked aggression. On the evening of December 29th, a domestic dispute erupted at the Samarin household. Paul argued with his father, who was intoxicated at the time. Consumed by anger, Paul left the house, taking with him a sawed-off rifle, which he claimed to have found in the forest long before. He set out along the road, intending to reach the neighboring town of Cozumville, hitchhiking along the way. A white hatchback became his fateful ride. At the wheel of the car was Hannah, while Ethan was in the passenger seat, teaching her how to drive a manual transmission. Paul climbed into the back seat. The journey was short. When the car approached a fork leading to the passenger's destination, a dispute arose over the fare. Paul rudely refused to pay, provoking a verbal confrontation. The argument escalated, and Paul used the weapon as leverage. Positioned behind Ethan, he fired through the back of the front seat. Ethan was severely wounded and rendered unable to resist. Panicked, Hannah slammed on the brakes and tried to flee into the nearby forest. However, the deep snow became a trap, and she quickly became stuck just a few dozen meters from the road. Realizing that she was the key witness, Paul pursued her. Upon catching up, he coldly shot her, ending her life. He then covered her body with snow, hoping the storm would conceal the evidence. Returning to the car, the shooter discovered that Ethan, badly wounded, was gathering his last strength and trying to crawl out of the vehicle. Without hesitation, Paul carried out his intent to the end, firing a second shot that fatally struck the young man. At that moment, the lights of oncoming traffic appeared on the horizon. Fearing exposure, Paul quickly dragged Ethan's body into the trunk, took the wheel, and drove toward Maple Hollow, hoping to put as much distance as possible between himself and the scene of Hannah's murder. However, his escape plan failed due to mechanical problems. About 20 kilometers from the crime scene, the car stalled and would not start. Realizing there was no way out, Paul pushed the vehicle into a ditch, covered Ethan's body with branches, took the victim's phones and cash, and walked home, confident he would face no consequences. By the end of 2014, the investigation had compiled a comprehensive body of evidence, leaving the defense no room to maneuver. The results of complex forensic examinations played a pivotal role, turning Paul's confession into irrefutable legal fact. Ballistics testing provided a clear answer. The injuries suffered by both victims were inflicted by the sawed-off rifle recovered from the attic hideout. This directly linked the weapon in Paul's possession to the deaths of Ethan and Hannah. Perhaps the most striking discovery came from biological analysis. Even though nearly 2 years had passed since the crime, and Paul had continued using the same shoes, modern testing methods detected microscopic traces of Ethan's blood on the soles. This sleeping trace, preserved against all odds, became direct proof that Paul was in immediate contact with the victim at the moment of the crime, eliminating any remaining doubts about his involvement. In December 2014, the Maple Hollow District Court began reviewing the case files. Paul was presented with a lengthy list of charges, including the murder of 2 individuals, illegal seizure of a vehicle, theft of personal property, and illegal possession of a firearm. During the hearings, the defense attempted to mitigate his culpability, but the cold-blooded killing of the injured, the cynical concealment of the bodies, and the subsequent use of the victims' belongings demonstrated exceptional danger to society and a complete lack of moral restraint. The prosecutor demanded the harshest punishment, emphasizing the irreversible consequences and the suspect's early attempts to mislead the investigation. The final verdict became the inevitable conclusion to this 2-year criminal saga. Paul was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 19 years in a maximum security prison. Additionally, a civil claim filed by Hannah's father for emotional damages was approved. The court ordered Paul to pay the victim's family $3 million. For the relatives, the ruling provided a legal closure, though it could never replace their loss. The lives of 2 young people, who had been building dreams of a happy future, were tragically cut short due to a refusal to pay a fare and the uncontrolled aggression of a random passenger. For the residents of Maple Hollow, the case remains a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life, proving that even years later, hidden truths emerge and the guilty face the justice they deserve.